Okay.
Make sure things are working.
I'd love to talk to you, Carol, about the Japanese prisoners, POWs.
Absolutely.
That's fascinating when we have another chance.
Yes, I have the whole roster of every single person who was at the Bedford Springs Resort. I got it from the National Archives.
We should send Alan. Maybe I did. I thought I might have the recording of our program on
Oh.
the Pine Grove Furnace and Bedford Springs.
Right. Looks like we are streaming, so we want to welcome Facebook and YouTube to the program this evening. We will have a screening of the film. What is the title of the
Fedeltà, Soldier Prisoner.
We will be screening this, and then we'll be doing a Q&A here on Greatest Generation Live with Glenn as our host. We'll be getting the program started now. We're going to play the music and let everybody in.
Harry Klepper, you must be very happy about something. Can't just be happy about being here.
Glenn, I'm very excited for this Zoom tonight. I mean, I'm always happy, but I'm really enjoying this one, and I'm out of work a little early for tax season, so.
Oh, there you go. That's a good reason to be happy.
Yes. Plus,
True.
I missed you guys while I was gone in Alaska, so I missed everybody.
Oh, goodness. Alaska.
We missed you too, Mary.
Yeah, I was leading a winter tour, and I got to go dog sledding with the great Martin Boozer, who's won 4 Iditarods.
There's nothing quite like dog sledding. I did that in Tromsø, Norway, near the North Pole.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
I'm still peeling from like the wind and sunburn.
My dachshund used to pull me around the back of my parking lot when it was ice. That's not as far as I got.
That's awesome.
Well, we'd love to welcome everyone here tonight to Greatest Generation Live for Thursday, March 20th. It's great to see you all this evening. We have a wonderful program planned, a film screening that we'll get to Glenn. We're going to introduce Steve and Alan here. Carol Popchuk, you're here joining us for semi-hosting duties as well. It's going to be exciting. What will happen, I'm going to let everybody know, is that when we start to stream the program, if we have any technical difficulties, I'll stop the stream, restart the film to make sure that we have a good connection and everybody can view it and listen to it. The other thing is I'll turn everybody's video and mics off. So you will have those off. At the end of the program, or the end of the film, I'll allow people to turn on their videos again, and you'll be able to unmute with questions. Feel free to use the chat during the program to list any questions that come into mind, so that if you happen to forget them, we can just refer to the chat. Otherwise, we're the Veterans Breakfast Club, and we hope that you enjoy this program this evening. You can check us out at veteransbreakfastclub.org for any and all information about our nonprofit here. I'm going to hand it off to Glenn. Glenn, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks very much. We're really pleased tonight to have Greatest Generation Live is our every Thursday night program on the Veterans Breakfast Club. As most of you know, in case anybody new is here, it's all things World War II. So authors, veterans, when we can still get them, experts on World War II, subjects on World War II, basically World War II. We're refighting World War II. And tonight we're really pleased to have this film. A little bit of background. So last year we did probably half a dozen, maybe 7 or 8 programs on American POWs in Germany. Mostly 8th Air Force, 15th Air Force, mostly U.S. Army Air Force veterans who had been shot down in the Stalags. And if you remember, we had Marilyn Walton, who was the historical consultant to Masters of the Air on as our expert, Nancy Putman. We had several other people on. So we got onto this POW theme, and there seemed to be a great deal of interest in it. And then Carol Popchuk, hi Carol, say hello.
Hi, Glenn.
Volunteered from the bottom of her heart to work on, came up with a question. What about German POWs in the United States? How were they treated? What were they like? And through her voluminous research, she discovered that there were quite a few POW camps right here in Pennsylvania. And one that she ran across was Pine Grove Furnace out in Cumberland County. We had a man, David Smith, who's one of the docents there and knows a lot about Pine Grove Furnace on. And then Carol also did some research and gave us a fascinating look at Bedford Springs, where the Japanese diplomats from Europe were interred. So we kind of got on this POW theme. And Carol then ran into Steve Mancini. Steve, please wave your hand, say hello.
Hi, everybody.
Okay. Steve is a professor at Robert Morris University, and we're going to let him, he's the producer of this film, and we'll be letting him tell his background a little bit later. And with Steve tonight is another professor from Gettysburg College, and that's Alan Perry. Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Welcome you all. Thank you.
So what we're going to ask Alan to do is to give us just sort of a 5-minute setup about the background of this film. And then we're going to start the film. Film's an hour, 15 minutes or so, Steve.
Yeah, but
And at the end of that, we'll go into Q&A. So we will go beyond the 8:30 hour, right, in order to get the Q&A in at the end. So Alan, want to give us a little background on this?
Well, thank you very much. Before I do, I'd like to say that it's quite an honor for me. I'm a veteran as well, 5 years United States Army, and I got interested actually in World War II because of my own personal stories. You were talking about 8th Air Force POWs in Germany. My great uncle spent 2 years there, and just different interests of mine that really have led me in many wonderful ways to this project on really studying the detainment of 1,200 Italian POWs that were detained here from May, this is in Letterkenny Army Depot right outside of Chambersburg, May 1944 through October of 1945. Most of these prisoners had been captured in North Africa and in Sicily during the summer of 1943 and were brought to the United States. And in September of that year, Italy signed an armistice with the Allied forces. And the United States government unilaterally began to think of what to do with the Italian POWs. And so we unilaterally, again, came up with a program of offering them cooperation status. So they could take an oath to the United States, and they could then be engaged in all activities except combat. They were not sent back to Italy to help with the U.S. Fifth Army, British Eighth Army going north. But that caused a lot of confusion. And so for about a month or two, all over the different camps in the United States, soldiers didn't know what to do. Italian soldiers didn't know what to do. They didn't get any direction from the Italian government, reconstituted in Bari in southern Italy. But it came to pass that they were given the opportunity to cooperate. At that time, there were about 50,000, 50,000 Italian POWs spread throughout the United States, and about 36 to 38,000 decided to cooperate, collaborate. They took an oath, and then they were organized over the next couple of months in looking at where they could best serve the United States home front. And so beginning in May of 1944, about a beginning in that month, eventually would reach a total force of 1,200 Italian POWs who had agreed to cooperate. All those Italian officers that had not agreed to cooperate were sent to Camp Hereford in Texas. And those that came, all ranks that came to Letterkenny, began to began to undertake roles of shipping, repairing, stocking, and to the primarily, well, both theaters of war, Pacific and Europe, the European theater, and they had many more rights than just regular POWs. They could go off post. They could. They were issued, as you'll learn tonight in the film, they were issued U.S. uniforms that had an Italian insignia. But it was really tough, you all, in the summer of '44 for Americans, for those citizens living locals around Chambersburg, because the Army, the War Department, did not do any sort of prepping that these soldiers, Italian soldiers, were coming in, that they had taken an oath. And so there was a lot of hostility, not just here, but in different places around the country where this experience of cooperation was unfolding. So beginning in late summer of '44, there was a great campaign of information that the U.S. War Department gave out, and the bad feelings and the confusion really abated. And it was from then really through the end of the war, right, the end of the European War in May of '45, and then with the end of the Pacific War in August, September, the POWs were really integrated very well into, of course, the mission that Letterkenny had as an army depot, and integrated into the community. The Italian American community, especially, you all, you don't think of many Italian Americans in Chambersburg, and there weren't, but from Baltimore, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, really reached out to these guys, and many of them had actually family members that if they weren't detained at Letterkenny, they were detained in other places, and so there was that connection to try to get in touch with their loved ones. But there was a great outreach of support. And there were many cases where, as you'll find out tonight, that there were love stories that took place, and many stories ended up with marriage. And so after the war, by law, all of them had to be repatriated. They had to be repatriated to Italy. And many of their sweethearts followed them back, married there, and then came back to the United States. So there's these wonderful love stories that we've come across. But it was just a very positive experience of two former enemies that met as military personnel and then civilian, and really forged a wonderful bond that's continuing today. That communities in Italy, and of course the Chambersburg community, just have really embraced the memory. And of course the main symbol is the Letterkenny chapel that was built by the POWs without any expense to the U.S. government. So that's what you're going to be really seeing, and as Steve has put together this wonderful documentary of this experience. So Fedeltà, faith, soldiers, and prisoners. So these prisoners were really soldiers, of course, and their dignity was really honored. And this was a positive experience in this otherwise horrific experience of World War II.
Alan, thank you so very much for that introduction.
Absolutely.
Let's jump into the film. And
Glenn, real quick, I want to make one mention. I want to introduce Paul Couline's on the call. Paul, say hello. Paul is you're gonna hear Paul speak in the documentary, but just real quick, Paul is one of the folks that actually maintains the chapel. So when you're watching the documentary, the reason that is a perfect example of someone, retired U.S. Army, Vietnam vet, But I really wanted to call out and just appreciate that the work that Paul and the folks do in Franklin County, the Historical Society, to maintain the chapel. And there's a wonderful 9/11 park there. And I know some folks are going to jump off before the film's over. It's an hour and 20 with the full credits. But I want to make one mention. This is the 80th year anniversary of the chapel's construction. So you'll see the chapel in the film. Paul is going to be excited for me to further invite you all out to Chambersburg in September, because September 11th, there's going to be a special ceremony out there, and about 30 of the families, the kids, are actually coming back to Chambersburg. So I wanted to mention that before you watch the film. So maybe put that on your calendar, September 11th, make the trip out to Chambersburg. I'm sorry, Glenn, I didn't want to hold you up. Thank you very much.
No, we're good. Paul, thank you for joining us. I thought
you.
that we were going to come on for the Q&A only, but thank you for joining us up front.
Certainly. Thanks for the invitation.
All right, I will start the video, everyone. As you noticed, I'm already stopping videos here. Once again, we will allow that to, you guys will be allowed to open up your videos after the film. If you have any problems, we will stop the film and we will restart. But give me a second here to set up the stream and we'll be good to go.
During World War II, nearly 50,000 Italian prisoners of war were imprisoned in the United States. Shortly after Italy signed an armistice with the Allies in September 1943, many Italian POWs swore allegiance to the United States and were formed into Italian service units. This is the story of one such ISU located at the Letterkenny Army Depot outside of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania.
La dichiarazione di guerra è già stata consegnata agli ambasciatori di Gran Bretagna e di Francia.
The bravery of the Italian soldier was very practical. I mean, when they needed to fight, they fought as well as they could and as well as they had been prepared. The equipment in particular was substandard to what they were facing. So it really brings in an interesting point. You know, even with that, they fought.
And they were doomed to fail. It wasn't that they weren't courageous. It was more that they were ill-equipped and logistically they weren't supplied. They were starving. They had no food. They had no water. They were out of ammunition. There's nothing left to do but surrender.
Last week, we saw the ill-fated invasion of North Africa by the forces of Italy in 1939.
the Italians become allied to the United States. And so they are being shipped out of North Africa, Sicily, and they're being brought into the United States as prisoners of war.
There were times when it was very difficult for them, as they would sometimes have to eat food from that had been thrown away. And he mentioned that he had found jars of jelly in the garbage somewhere, and he was just eating that with his fingers. They were so hungry.
They came here as prisoners, and now 80-something years later, commanding officer of the same location they were at is of Italian heritage. So I think that's just part of the whole American dream, right? You can come here wherever you came from, however little status or money you had, you can rise up. It's just the American dream, right?
They were here for roughly between 17 to 18 months. That's it. Here we are almost 80 years later, and we're still talking about the Italian service unit.
It seems so obvious now that what we have here is very special, and it's not just a Chambersburg story or Franklin County story. It's an American story.
Nestled in the hills of south-central Pennsylvania is the town of Chambersburg, a town that encompasses a rich history which began over 200 years ago. After a 3-hour drive from Pittsburgh, the team arrived to begin filming. Once you arrive, you'll see Chambersburg is no ordinary town. It is the home of Letterkenny Army Depot, a sprawling base with beautiful scenery and an important mission. However, it was also the home of roughly 1,250 Italian soldier prisoners during World War II. As the team finally pulls up, it's here at the famous Letterkenny Army Chapel that our story begins.
If someone comes up to you and says, I hear there's something about Letterkenny, and you said, give me the elevator speech. What's the elevator speech about this whole thing?
In 1944, a contingent of Italian prisoners of war came to Letterkenny and provided assistance to the United States government, especially the United States Army, and had an experience, a lived experience that was extraordinarily positive for both, well, for the command, the U.S. Army command here, the local civilian populace, and also the soldiers. It's such a positive experience. When you think of the great controversies, when you just look at the U.S. home front during the war, you know, you've got Japanese internment and the tragedy of that. This is a story that is positive because of the outcome, the way that they experience, the POWs experience being treated, the help that they gave to the U.S. command, and the interactions of two cultures coming together, and these two different cultures blending. And in memory, and down through the generations, this story has been passed down. And the interest is there to make sure that it's honored.
Audio rolls. A is rolling. B, roll. C is rolling.
Go ahead and sit.
Let's start with Letterkenny itself. You know, when we were coming in here, we see this base in what would seemingly be the middle of nowhere, but yet it's kind of a strategic importance. Let's talk about Letterkenny and why was this base built and why is it here?
Well, the story, I think, goes back to Pearl Harbor. So here we are, December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor is attacked. Within 2 weeks after that, the War Department orders that about 20,000+ acres of land is purchased to build a support depot. They select Chambersburg in Franklin County as the location. Beautiful, pristine farmlands, agricultural. A lot of history goes back easily to the 18th century. And so that's how this begins. But I think there's another story that's connected that I want to touch on just for a moment that is very important. When the Department of Defense, the War Department, decided that it wanted to build this depot here in Chambersburg, it was looking for a place that I think today you would call it an inland port. So it's close enough to Baltimore, close enough to Philadelphia to reach the seaports. The rail lines were running between those locations, so products could be packaged and shipped out of here, and in time, equipment, weaponry could be brought in and retrofitted and shipped back out to the war zone. So we were essentially, we became a depot that supported Europe. And the war fighting effort, and that's still the case today.
The selection back then and as is now was started off with mostly just a location. So it's very accessible to rail waterways and pretty close to DC. And then the bigger part, which I think is really important now, is just the people of the area. You have people in the area that are just used to working with their hands and you know, so drawing labor from the local area was you know, a little easier than it might have been in some places, because you have people that are they just used to doing their own, building their own houses, you know, working on their own cars and all that kind of manual hand labor. That skill set was really important to what they were going to do once the depot was established.
Of the 20,000 acres, there were about 1,000, 1,100 people that lived in this valley that ultimately became Letterkenny Ordnance Depot initially. And we're talking about 250 families. We're talking about 8 schools, 5 stores, 5 churches, 8 cemeteries that were in this valley area that the government stepped in and took over essentially by eminent domain. So here we are in the middle of December 1941, and the government declares, because of the war effort, and they needed to move quickly to build this installation, you need to be out by April 1st, 1942. And that's exactly what happened. The farmers were displaced, and the depot started construction on that date. Now, you can imagine that the significant emotional event of those families being displaced, and a lot of young children that were growing up, generations since the 18th century had grown up here, and now those 250 families had to leave and find other employment, other farms. That was, at that time, pretty tragic in terms of how people felt about that. But the silver lining, as the writings describe to us, over time, say over the next 3-4 decades, those children grew up and gained employment here at the depot as it grew. And the older the parents took jobs in many cases here. And so the writings say that the people in the long run appreciated the economic benefit of what ultimately took place.
Because of the rail lines and the proximity to the coast, it made the depot the destination for supplies and material to support the Allied war effort in Europe. So there was a big need for labor, which was one of the main factors in converting these Italian former Italian POWs into labor battalions. Letterkenny at the time, because of most of the men of fighting age were serving overseas, Letterkenny, about 55 to 60% of the workforce here was actually women at the time, called women of ordnance workers. So there was a desperate need for labor. Letterkenny was a prime choice for one of the Italian service unit to be designated here.
By 1943, those Axis powers forces, the Italians specifically, become allied to the United States. Mussolini is gone, fascism is, they're no longer under that umbrella. And so they are being shipped out of North Africa, Sicily, and they're being brought into the United States as prisoners of war. So even though the Italians, Italy was allied to the United States by the fall of '43, the War Department, the State Department did not recognize Italy as allied for another year. So it was really October of 1944 before that was accepted, before that was announced to the rest of the country that this was in fact the case. So now these Italians are coming in here starting in May of '44, and it still hasn't been acknowledged, but they're coming in here starting in '44 into the United States. And about 1,250 of them from Italy get sent here to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, to Letterkenny Army Depot. And so where this chapel currently sits was right in the middle of a prisoner of war camp. Now there is a fine line because those Italian soldiers were part of a country that's allied to the United States, no longer aligned with the Axis powers. They were referred more as soldier prisoners of war, and they were treated very, very well. And all of the accounts that we have tell us that they were fed and clothed and cared for medically, and their time off, and they were paid 80 cents a day. They were cared for better than any other type of prisoner of war experience, you know, internationally and nationally.
My name is Frances McAvoy. My father was Alfred Tonolo, and my mother was Tina Norse Tonolo. Mom was from Berwick, Pennsylvania, which is not too far from here. My father was born in Mestre, Venice, in 1920. Eventually, during World War II, he was captured in Tunisia on May 11th, 1943, by the British. They had gone through the soldiers had gone through many hardships, the hardships of war, as you can imagine. And he was actually grateful to have been captured by the British because they were not cruel.
When the Italian POWs first entered the United States, they were sent to various locations around the country to be counted and sorted. Many soldiers remarked about how glad they were to be in the United States, far removed from the awful fighting conditions in North Africa and Sicily.
He actually was so happy to have a bed to sleep in because he had been sleeping on the sand for several years in Africa. He was happy to have a bed to sleep in and a shower and a bathroom, and the place was relatively clean. And so he showered and dressed and went to the mess hall, and he was just astonished at the amount of food there was there. So he took his tray and he went to get his food, and the chef who was giving the food out asked him, "How do you like your eggs?" And this was the guy who had been a prisoner of war. I mean, he's a prisoner of war now, but had endured all these hardships of war for several years. And now here's an American soldier who was asking him, how do you want your eggs? He was dumbfounded. He was astonished and so grateful. And he always told that story about how grateful he was to be here at Letterkenny.
The day in the life of the Italian service unit was waking up quite early, roll call. They had their assigned guards with them that would do roll call every morning. They would go over to the chow hall, the mess hall, and then load up onto buses to be taken to their work assignments. Part of that was that they're able to make 80 cents a day supporting the Allied war effort, which in today's dollars is about $14 a day, which doesn't sound like much, but there were different times when the ISU would pull together their earnings and support various causes. One example is that there was a bond, U.S. bond drive going on the depot towards the end of 1944, and they were able to raise over $300 for the bond drive, the ISU unit was, and in today's dollars, that's over $6,000, which is a really great effort on their part. There are different times when the ISU unit would pull together their funds to send back home. There's one instance when one of the servicemen received a letter from home saying how bad off their family was, that they had family members that were killed by the Nazis, that they were trying to help the Americans. They had little to eat, no money. So the unit here raised funds to send what they could home to try to support that Italian serviceman's family. Whenever the Italians arrived here, there was some trepidation by the community as to not quite sure how to receive the Italians. Because just a few months ago, they were combatants. They were the enemy. They were over here because they were POWs captured in North Africa.
And what was very hard to understand for an American, and it makes sense, this way of treating Italians was way over the top, too kind, that they were coddling. In other words, why are these POWs, prisoners of war, being treated so well when they were holding their rifles and throwing grenades, shooting and throwing their grenades at their kids? How is that possible? So they were very upset with and not understanding what this program of cooperation meant. And that's the summer of 1944. The military then command really through decrees and programs at the War Department began to help local commands, in particular the depot command here, to face that, to have outreach to the community and explain what was going on.
They did not know how to accept the fact that there were Italians here living off the fat of the land, per se. They were receiving 3 square meals a day, had quite easy jobs, what they thought there would be easy work to do. But they soon found out after a couple public meetings that it was not the case. So what happened early on is that the commander at the time, Colonel Hare,
he went out and briefed the civic organizations, the veteran service organizations, to say, look, this is who they are. They're part of a country that's allied to America, and they're working hard to support your sons and daughters that are overseas, and they're making it possible for us to accomplish the mission in a very efficient fashion. And I think as a result of that, everybody sat back and said, oh, well, we didn't really understand that.
While maybe somewhat uneasy at first, really created a bond with the Italians that were here.
And I think over time, because the prisoners, the Italian soldier prisoners here were allowed in escort, I think they were in groups of 30, they could be taken downtown. They had opportunities to go to performances in town, to dances, to observe parades, and they met other people from the community and established friendships. And, you know, that also extended to men meeting women of the community, falling in love. Eventually, after repatriation in October of '45, back to Italy, they came back and took wives and got married here. Some of the women here went over to Italy and got married there to some of the soldier prisoners that they had met while they were here. So the community really, I think, embraced the Italian soldiers. And of course, this edifice has become a very important piece of our culture, our history. And it links us as Americans across the ocean to Italy, and they to us. And I think that's an important part of this story.
The soldiers here actually had relatives and friends that lived in the United States already, and the friends and family came to visit them quite often. So that's how my parents met. My mother was, as I said, from Berwick, which is not too far from here, Berwick, Pennsylvania. And her family had, her friends and family knew some prisoners of war at Letterkenny. So they invited her to come take a ride with them and come to visit. And my father then was introduced to my mother, and they fell in love here at the Letterkenny Depot. And they were able to see each other on several occasions while he was here, before he returned, before he got sent back to Italy. They had this strong love for each other. My father didn't know how long he was going to be unable to return to America, and it turned out to be 4 years, because there was a restriction on Italian immigration after the war. Italians weren't allowed to come back to immigrate to America. So my parents corresponded by letter the old-fashioned way, for 4 years. And they finally made plans to marry in Venice. And my mother and her sister, her older sister, who was her chaperone, sailed on the Queen Mary and arrived in Venice. And that's where they were married in a lovely, lovely ceremony.
During their time at Letterkenny, the men formed strong relationships with the local community. Some of those relationships were even romantic, and after repatriation, some of the men and women stayed in touch and ended up marrying and starting families together. However, there were some instances where families were unable to reunite, leaving many with unanswered questions.
Giannini Antonio mi ha parlato appunto di questa situazione che ha avuto lui andando a Letterkenny ed è stato avvicinato da questo Ronnie Hyde, che sentendolo parlare, essendo italiano, lui si sentiva italiano, si è avvicinato a loro e mi ha detto che si è commosso, piangeva in continuazione e ha abbracciato appunto Antonio Brescianini, e lui insieme a altre persone gli hanno promesso di interessarsi a questa storia di Ronnie, che in effetti è un figlio di un prigioniero che è nato dopo che suo padre è stato rimpatriato. Quindi magari il papà non sapeva neanche che con la signora che era stato insieme era incinta e quindi ha partorito poi. Comunque sta di fatto che questo ragazzo è stato prima tenuto dalla nonna per qualche anno e poi messo in orfanotrofio e adottato successivamente da un'altra famiglia. È chiaro che nelle famiglie dopo si inizia a parlare di tu non sei mio figlio, il mio vero figlio, noi non siamo la tua vera famiglia, e lui ha saputo le sue origini.
There was always a story in our family that Ronnie's father possibly was one of the Italian POWs, but it was like a secret. No one would talk about it. So the more I saw things in the paper, the more I just felt a pull that I needed to come up here to the celebration. And when I did, that's when I talked with Dr. Perry and Antonio Bresciani, and things started moving forward from there because I do work on the family history and the family genealogy. My father and Ronnie's mother were brother and sister, so that's where the connection was. But Ronnie wasn't raised by family. My mother tried to bring him back into the family, and when I was a teenager, she came to me and told me she wanted to take me to his house to meet him and his wife. And so then we started trying to get him back with our family where he belonged. So like I said, I like to do genealogy, and my mother always wondered, you know, who his father was. She wanted to know, and so I started doing the research, and I think it probably was within a year or two after Letterkenny that I had Ronnie do a DNA test, and lo and behold, because the rumor that was out there, lo and behold, the DNA test showed that he's 50% Italian. So we knew we had our answer. We started, you know, the DNA matches started rolling in after he tested with the Ancestry. He actually has, I wrote it down, he has like over 2,400 DNA matches on his paternal line. More than I do on mine. But a lot of the matches, there were certain names that kept popping up, the same similar names. And what we came up with was one of the POWs who was from San Anastasia in the Campania area. His family still lives there. He had 9 children. The DNA matches run back to his family. But his name is one that was listed on the list of POWs. Then I was on a Facebook site, and someone told me to private message them. They had information on the family. So I did that. He said he would do some research. He researched, and he told me the POW's parents' name, and it was that other name that kept popping up, that his mother had that last name. And so we had the 2 names finally that we narrowed it down. So we go to the records office, or until someone does a DNA test, then we'll be 100% positive.
In America esiste appunto Ronnie I, e spiego questo qui, che avrebbe il piacere di conoscere senza nessuna pretesa, vuole conoscere i suoi familiari. Dice sì, va bene, io appena torno a mio marito vi faccio sapere, vi chiamo. Questo è successo 10 giorni fa. A tutt'oggi non abbiamo avuto nessuna telefonata, non sappiamo nulla, non sappiamo se insistere. Io ho detto ad Antonio, adesso l'unica cosa che ci resta da fare è andare dal vescovo, magari il vescovo di Aversa, che conosco, e il vescovo di Nola della diocesi napoletana. Si possono incontrare, fare qualcosa di fare in modo che i familiari si incontrino e poi tutto il resto verrà da sé.
Well, I'm 77 years old. I'd like to know who my dad was. People don't understand that. Those boys, I'm glad they got a dad now, and they know who he is. I never know, and I still don't know. That's tough.
Really interesting aspect of the Italians is this unit was very talented in building things, and especially masonry work that was discovered to then lay the groundwork of the recreation building, which was built, and then ultimately the Letterkenny Chapel.
U.S. War Department plans to build the chapel and bell tower had been formalized by December 1944. But many in the Letterkenny community believed the actual impetus for undertaking the construction began with the attempted suicide of one of the detained Italian soldiers. This story still animates the facts surrounding the most important material symbol of the Letterkenny POW experience.
The commander at the time, the very first commander that started in, April of 1942, he would check the barracks every night. And one night, a near tragic situation occurred where he came upon one of the Italian soldier prisoners of war, and that person was committing suicide or attempting to commit suicide. He stopped that. They administered medical care, and he asked that individual to be brought to his office the next day. And so in the conversation with that particular soldier, prisoner of war, he asked him, well, what did you do in Italy? And he said, well, I was a stonemason. And the commander thought and said, well, we don't have a chapel here, but could you design one? And the prisoner said, well, I can design it and I can build it. And so the way that evolved is that the building next door to this chapel was built in about 30 days by the Italian soldier prisoners of war. And they used that temporarily as an assembly hall, as a place to hold religious services, mostly Catholic, and to have other types of meetings and social events. But they started building this chapel, and that was in December of 44. In January of 1945, they started building this chapel. And the way they did that is they designed it, and they went out into this 20,000 acres, and many of those farmsteads that were torn down, they picked materials from those buildings and brought them back and built this chapel from those remaining materials, from old mills and houses. So most of what we see in this chapel are original materials from those farmsteads. Now, the chapel was built in the space of about 5 months. They finished it, started in January. Of course, that's kind of the coldest time of the year here. And they finished it in May of that same year. And one of the things that the government said was, well, we have a mission to perform. And of course, all of those Italian soldiers were also brought here to handle the need for labor. They could only work at night because of that mission support that every day and supply and transportation elements of the depot. And if they needed materials like mortar, they had to pay for it out of that 80 cents a day, which of course at that time went a lot further than perhaps it does today. And they did that with great joy, and that really provided them with a morale opportunity to be gainfully employed. And along that same line, and I think because that soldier was despondent and tried to commit suicide because he had heard that his wife had died in Italy. That was the main reason that occurred. But taking on the responsibility of designing and building this chapel gave them a purpose.
All of the soldiers, a lot of the soldiers who could participated in the construction of this chapel. They were all very happy to be able to do that because most of them were very religious. They came from a Catholic background, and they were very religious people, and they loved the idea of having a chapel here. And so they were very proud of it. And the bell tower was the big thing.
Corporal Smith properly described the Italians by saying, "When one finds 3 Italians who have stopped in one place for more than a week, one will also find a small Colosseum after they left."
I think because it's actually so incredible what they were able to accomplish in such a short time with such little resources. So, I mean, you have a bunch of folks who were prisoners of war. Now, all of a sudden, they volunteered to support the Allied efforts. And a lot of the structures that are, some of them still in place today, were built just from, whatever resources they can find on the depot. And if you just look at the chapel, for instance, and the great stonework on there, just I think the artistry and the skill that they had and the passion that they brought, because under the circumstances they were in, it's not easy to just not only work all day long, but then at the end of the day, put some extra time in on your own after you work 10, 12-hour day to build something else that now still stands in this community 80 plus years later.
Arrivederci.
Ok, grazie per tutto. Ok, vogliamo avere una conversazione. Ti chiederò domande. Prima domanda, come si chiama?
Antonio Brescianini. Mio papà ha combattuto nella ritirata di Al Alamein, che sarebbe del Nord Africa, ed è stato catturato dagli inglesi nella piana della Tunisia.
E poi dopo è stato consegnato agli americani.
E poi portato negli Stati Uniti d'America.
Sì, mio padre mi ha parlato della guerra, di tutta la sua esperienza, quindi i ricordi della guerra e dei combattimenti erano ricordi molto aspri, molto duri, molto crudi.
E mi ha raccontato, diciamo, lui non era proprio nelle prime linee, era nelle seconde linee, quindi mi raccontava, diciamo, l'epilogo della guerra che in Africa, perché mi diceva che di giorno era notte e di notte era giorno dai bombardamenti, e loro si trovavano molto spaesati da questa situazione perché non avevano abbastanza mezzi. Quella guerra specialmente fu una guerra dove divise anche l'Italia in 2 fazioni, cecchi erano un modo, cecchi erano un altro, quindi quella guerra in particolare dall'Italia non voleva essere combattuta da nessun fronte. Tant'è vero che gli italiani si trovarono prigionieri degli inglesi e prigionieri dei tedeschi, quindi non avevano identità.
La cosa che più l'aveva colpito è stato l'arrivo a Letterkenny, che
era dimagrito moltissimo per le ritirate che aveva fatto e non potevano mangiare perché avevano lo stomaco chiuso.
Poi però è cambiato tutto, nel senso che si è accorto che lì poi lo trattavano molto bene, e anche se lavorava e lui diceva che lavorava per le ferrovie, credo che facesse le traversine delle ferrovie, però aveva anche molto tempo libero. Un aneddoto che mi ricordo che quando ero piccolo, che lui diceva che lo trattavano talmente bene che mangiava le bistecche con le forbici, perché erano talmente grandi che uscivano dal piatto, cosa che in Italia, dove abitava lui, non esiste, la carne la vedevano forse a Natale una volta, per cui questo voleva dire che stava bene. Poi, quando è tornato in Italia, poi ha conosciuto mia madre e quindi non è più ripartito.
Questa è stata un'esperienza che lui caldeggiava molto come esperienza umana di amicizia sua personale con i suoi commilitoni, prigionieri, e con gli americani, quel battaglione che avevano formato gli americani di questi prigionieri. È stata un'esperienza di scambio umano e di amicizia. Questa è stata una bella cosa.
Racconta questo periodo come un periodo di salvezza, non solo dalla guerra, ma dalla miseria, dalla fame. È stato curato, è stato accudito, ha imparato l'inglese, ha fatto 2 anni di scuola per cui conosceva anche la lingua inglese. E raccontava che per la prima volta aveva visto i mezzi agricoli che in Italia non c'erano, almeno nel paese di mio padre ancora non c'erano, e dice che la manodopera era soprattutto femminile e loro aiutavano.
Lui dell'America in generale, perché è stato anche in altri posti prima, e quando parlava sembrava un bambino che parlava del paese dei balocchi. Io lo ricordo così, mio papà.
E quando lui parlava, ad esempio, delle immagini che aveva visto negli Stati Uniti, da noi in Italia ancora non c'era la televisione e quindi non credevano a lui.
Per cui dal momento in cui dopo la guerra ricordava lo sviluppo che c'era in America e che non c'era in Italia. In Italia, quando sono ritornati i nostri prigionieri, dopo la guerra era un'Italia in miseria, povera, per cui ricordava sempre questo aspetto ed era da stimolo per mio padre, facendo gli esempi con gli americani, ma soprattutto il rapporto con gli italo-americani, che andavano a trovarlo nella prigionia. Lo parlava sempre di questo.
Mi raccontava, lui faceva il meccanico prima di partire militare. Poi, mentre faceva il militare, è scoppiata la guerra, allora l'hanno trattenuto e lì è stato fatto appunto prigioniero, e penso sicuramente lui avrà fatto lavori di meccanica. Infatti lui parlava che era rimasto impressionato perché noi nella campagna lavoravano ancora la terra con il bue e con l'aratro, e lì diceva che c'erano molti campi, molte macchine. Lui faceva manutenzione a queste macchine da prima, non a Letterkenny, e non si faceva niente a mano, facevano tutte le macchine, e per lui era andato in un altro mondo. Poi invece di Letterkenny parlava, diceva più che altro del rapporto, lui parlava che si era creato, per lui erano tutti fratelli.
Poi mio padre, essendo un musicista, ha trovato altre persone che erano musicisti e hanno formato questa banda dove loro facevano ballare i civili che intervenivano nei sabati o comunque quando avevano accesso i civili, o comunque suonavano la musica per intrattenere le persone. E gli stessi che hanno costruito la cappelletta, sempre lavori di muratura a un altro livello, avevano fatto anche l'anfiteatro, un anfiteatro dove loro suonavano e la gente interveniva, ascoltava la musica e ballava.
Che per mio papà, vabbè, era molto legato alla chiesetta, ma lui soprattutto era un musicista. E vabbè, la storia della chiesetta, come ha detto Il presidente era legato a questo soldato che si stava suicidando, eccetera, eccetera, quindi è nata la chiesetta. Però loro hanno creato poi la banda, che mio papà chiama la banda dei Galli. E qualcuno invece dice Pollassi, vabbè, io ho un appunto dove parla dei Galli, e quindi c'era chi cantava, chi suonava, lui suonava il violino, e quel violino che vi ho portato è proprio quello che è arrivato dall'America poi, che si è portato a casa.
Questi erano i suoi ricordi. Non aveva aspirazioni musicali, non aveva aspirazioni architettoniche, non sapeva fare il falegname, era uno di buon umore che viveva questa esperienza come una cosa positiva che gli era capitata nella sua vita.
Sì, mi raccontava tantissimo. Mi raccontava che lui gli guidava il camion, infatti questa è la patente che gli hanno dato a Letterkenny, quindi lui portava tutto quello che c'era da portare nel campo. Non mi ha mai detto il nome, penso perché non lo ricordasse forse, però mi raccontava molto spesso del periodo lì, si è trovato molto bene, anche perché per pura fortuna vicino c'aveva una zia, quindi molto spesso usciva, andava dalla zia, aveva le cugine lì, quindi si è trovato molto bene. Ha contribuito anche alla chiesa portando tutto il materiale che c'era da portare con il camion, quindi lui è diciamo, sempre stato un autista di camion, quindi era la sua passione, quindi lui era molto fiero di aver guidato anche lì e di aver dato il suo contributo anche lì.
Sì, mio padre ha parlato molto della sua prigionia a Letterkenny, ha parlato molto del cardinale Cicognani, e aveva la sua bella piantina, vedete che ha scritto la chiesetta della pace. E la cosa più importante è questo foglietto che forse ha aiutato poi il grande Brescianini a trovare una parte di noi.
Mio padre voleva trasmettere la sua storia e ha cercato in tutti i modi di trasmetterla. Non è stato molto ascoltato e io sono felice di essere stata contattata dall'ANPIL nel 2015, sono stata rintracciata e attraverso l'ANPIL io spero che le storie di tutti e quindi anche della sua storia venga raccontata dappertutto, in tutte le scuole e in tutta Italia. Quelli che vogliono ascoltare.
Però l'ho perso che ero ancora giovane, avevo 18 anni e non ero molto interessata ai suoi racconti.
Allora, mio nonno era piemontese e quindi era una persona molto riservata, di poche parole. Ha lasciato un diario in 2 parti, ha parlato molto poco della prigionia e questo è un po' un mio scrupolo, perché mi sono chiesta, sono io che non ho fatto domande o è lui che non ne voleva parlare? Quello che ha raccontato, più che altro del suo lavoro, perché era falegname e quindi che era molto apprezzato dagli americani, e addirittura quando era a Letterkenny gli ufficiali lo portavano nelle loro case private per fare dei piccoli lavori di riparazione, dei piccoli mobili, e lui era orgoglioso che apprezzassero l'abilità italiana, artigianale italiana.
Mio nonno, se fosse ancora vivo, vorrei avere tanti particolari e tanti ricordi della guerra, di quella che è stata la sua cattura, le vicende in Africa, e sono tutti quei particolari che si possono apprendere solamente nel momento in cui tu li vivi. Per esempio, lui aveva questa devozione verso la patria, verso la libertà. Come ho già detto, era in contrasto con le idee fasciste.
Allora, io vorrei che mio padre parlava poco, però l'umanità e il fatto forse di aver condiviso con tante persone un periodo di vita particolare, brutto, e lo ha spinto ad aver fiducia negli altri. Mio padre non aveva nemici, non ha mai parlato male di nessuno. Il fatto della comunità, di stare insieme, per lui era un valore. E questo spirito, infatti anche quando tra donne si parlava, lui non voleva pettegolezzi, voleva la coesione, e forse l'ha imparato in questo periodo di difficoltà.
L'associazione AMPIL è nata sul viaggio gli americani. Ci hanno chiesto nel 70° anniversario della costruzione della cappella di Letterkenny la possibilità di una delegazione andare in America. E in questa delegazione siamo andati 23-24 persone, fra cui c'era anche Carlo Borghetti, che abbiamo ricordato prima, e in vari spostamenti con il pullman, con il bus, è venuto fuori questa idea di Carlo Borghetti di fare questa associazione che raggruppasse un po' come ramificazione di tutta Italia il collegamento, e da lì la bellezza di questa associazione è che gli stessi figli, femmine, maschi, dicono che questo ricordo, questa memoria è come se avessimo riscoperto ancora la memoria dei nostri padri, e tanti confidano che vanno a cercare nelle soffitte, nelle cantine, nelle seconde case, foto, documenti per ricordare questi avvenimenti. Ecco, l'associazione è nata proprio per questa memoria.
È l'associazione che è nata, come ricordava Antonio Brescianini, che è l'anima dell'associazione, perché senza di lui non ci sarebbe, dobbiamo dirlo, l'associazione, che ha chiamato direttamente ognuno di noi, facendo riferimento, e ricordo benissimo la sua telefonata quando mi chiese: ma lei per caso ha dei parenti che hanno fatto la guerra là, sono stati prigionieri? Sì, e allora da lì è nata questa amicizia incredibile, però l'anima è Antonio Brescianini.
Questa è un'esperienza straordinaria. Straordinaria perché non mi è dato da capire, da sapere che non esiste un'associazione che ha raggruppati tanti soci, ma anche figli di prigionieri. La nostra associazione, siamo in contatto con circa 593 per l'esattezza, famiglie contattate, e la ricerca verso i comuni di tutta Italia va avanti per cercare i familiari di questi prigionieri per rendere questa memoria. Per cui mi piacerebbe insieme a tutti voi andare avanti in questa ricerca per lasciare questa memoria, perché è un ponte che lega prima di tutti noi, ma anche verso l'America, è un ponte di fratellanza e di unità.
Avere costituito un'associazione ci consente di poter girare per tutta l'Italia e forse in futuro anche fuori dall'Italia, contattando le istituzioni, i comuni, le regioni, dove poter portare la nostra mostra, esporre i pannelli e quindi ampliare la conoscenza. Vorrei che l'associazione venga sostenuta anche da quelli che non sono i figli o i parenti dei prigionieri italiani a Letterkenny, ma anche da altri che si possono unire a questa associazione e portare avanti questa memoria. Come nel mio caso, io non sono un parente, ma mi sono unito a questa storia perché è molto importante e molto bella e voglio contribuire a farla conoscere sempre di più.
Anche a me piacerebbe che venisse che ci fosse questa memoria perché fa parte della nostra storia, delle nostre radici, ricordare quello che hanno vissuto, perché a me personalmente, quando mia figlia andava a scuola alle elementari, la maestra ha detto chiedete ai nonni se hanno fatto la guerra e dove hanno combattuto. E quando mia figlia ha detto che il suo nonno era stato prigioniero in America, la maestra gli ha detto: ma chi ti ha detto queste stupidaggini? Come fa tuo nonno a essere prigioniero in America se gli americani erano i nostri alleati? Chi ti ha detto queste cose? E ha mandato a chiamare me cosa stavo dicendo a mia figlia. Io ho detto, guardi che mio papà è stato prigioniero in America, e lei non voleva crederci. Allora io mi sono stupita che una maestra, un insegnante non sapesse queste cose, cosa era accaduto. E secondo me invece è importante far conoscere queste cose.
E se io dovessi dire alle generazioni di adesso cosa fare e come parlare dei prigionieri americani, vorrei che questo fosse fatto nelle scuole, perché nelle scuole in Italia dei campi di concentramento in America non ne sa niente nessuno. E questo io l'ho scoperto perché quando parlo con i miei amici, con i miei conoscenti, dicendo che mio padre è stato prigioniero in America, si stupiscono tutti. Credevano che i campi di concentramento fossero solo in Germania o in Inghilterra, e nessuno sa dei campi di concentramento in Germania. Per cui vorrei che nelle scuole italiane si parli molto di più anche di questo fatto storico che conoscono in pochissimi. E quindi questa sarebbe la mia speranza per poter far riconoscere a tutti gli italiani quello che hanno passato mio padre, ma a tutti anche quelli che sono stati prigionieri negli Stati Uniti.
Spero che l'associazione venga conosciuta sempre di più, per fare conoscere sempre di più questa storia, soprattutto alle giovani generazioni. E mi piacerebbe che l'associazione domani possa andare a parlare nelle scuole, incontrare gli studenti che hanno poca memoria e che non sempre a scuola imparano tutto quello che riguarda il nostro passato. Noi siamo figli della nostra storia. Se non conosciamo la nostra storia non possiamo avere davanti strade giuste da percorrere.
La memoria storica è questo che è importante sia per le persone come mio zio che hanno partecipato a questo conflitto, che hanno sofferto soprattutto, per esempio dei 680 carristi, solo 22 si salvarono illesi e vennero imbarcati per gli Stati Uniti. Quindi mi diceva, bisogna ricordarlo, bisogna avere quelle ambizioni positive affinché i nostri ragazzi, tu, tuo cugino, dobbiate sempre portare nel mondo questo messaggio di pace.
Vorrei che appunto la gente sapesse che con i loro sacrifici ora godiamo di tutte le libertà e tutto il resto, e aborriamo le guerre, perché le guerre non sono mai buone, portano solo distruzione e morte.
Non è facile, loro si sono sacrificati ma l'uomo non capisce mai, infatti guardate in che situazione siamo adesso. E quindi di sicuro mi direbbe l'uomo sta sbagliando ancora e non è servito a nulla il nostro sacrificio, però dovremmo appunto continuare con queste testimonianze, con queste associazioni proprio per insegnare ai nostri figli che però c'è il modo per vivere senza guerra.
Quindi questo spirito comunque di far qualcosa per cambiare ci deve essere nei giovani, non accettare tutto perché tanto è così. Il messaggio è quello, fare qualcosa, perché i nostri genitori in queste situazioni, nella guerra, nella prigionia, comunque sono riusciti a costruire, a uscirne fuori e a tirare avanti il boom che c'è stato in Italia, lo dobbiamo a loro, non a noi.
Fare memoria è molto importante perché noi dobbiamo evitare di ripetere gli errori del passato. Questa storia ci racconta gli errori della Seconda Guerra Mondiale, gli errori di avere fatto una guerra. Purtroppo abbiamo tante guerre nel mondo oggi, quindi vuol dire che purtroppo non siamo capaci di ricordare i nostri errori e di evitarli. Ma quella storia ci aiuta anche a capire cosa c'era di buono in quel momento. L'amicizia tra i prigionieri, l'amicizia tra il popolo italiano attraverso quei prigionieri in America e il popolo americano, e quindi organizzare quella memoria è fondamentale per poterla tramandare meglio in futuro.
Allora, quello che io vorrei dire è questo: se dopo quasi 80 anni si parla ancora oggi di queste gesta, opera che i nostri padri sono riusciti a fare, non so, e a tramandare nella memoria dei ricordi degli americani, tanto è vero che voi siete qua. E questa è una cosa molto bella e credo, io ho sempre sognato che di questa fantastica pagina di storia si facesse un film documentario e il sogno si è avverato, perché credo che i migliori film avvengono proprio delle storie vere e questa è una storia vera, molto bella, che sicuramente va tramandata anche ai posteri.
I had been captured in North Africa after 3 years of fighting in the desert. We had been on many American army posts doing manual labor. Now, in 1944, we were sent to Letterkenny.
Mio padre si chiamava Amilcare Mazzantini.
Volpi Renato.
Francesco Longhitano. Perani Giovanni.
85 years later, and you still have families, descendants of these men, coming back to America to see where they lived and worked, and the structures they built is a huge testament to how important it is to their families.
Mio papà si chiamava Mario Garbagnati.
Alfonso della Russa.
Di mio nonno Francesco Romanello.
Giovanni Appi.
When they came into this chapel, you could have heard a pin drop. And while they were here, they hugged and they cried and they sang and they laughed and they took pictures. And suddenly, those many miles from Italy to the United States, to Chambersburg, Franklin County, suddenly that gap was closed.
Mio papà si chiamava Antonino Falanga.
Si chiamava Carlo Scalmana.
E mio padre si chiamava Dilio Gobbino.
Giovanni Barbè.
Severino Conviti.
Di Pasquale Cirillo.
Ma quella storia ci aiuta anche a capire cosa c'era di buono in quel momento. L'amicizia tra i prigionieri, l'amicizia tra il popolo italiano attraverso quei prigionieri in America e il popolo americano. E quindi organizzare quella memoria è fondamentale per poterla tramandare meglio in futuro.
Mio papà si chiama Raimondo.
Vitto Giuseppe.
Mio nonno si chiama Pietro Bracchi.
Nicola Cudemo.
Mio padre si chiamava Savio Cavagna.
How did the Americans treat you?
They think that's wonderful reading. They were so good that we just couldn't believe it. After working all day, they would come at night to work on the chapel. It is still here. It is an army chapel now. It is like a symbol, a beautiful symbol of friendship between the people of Italy and the people of America.
To see the good that was here in this horrific point in our history, in the world history of humanity, this incredible catastrophe of the Second World War, that there was positive good that came out of this because people were open to cooperating and coming together. That's the legacy, and the legacy continues today through children, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, understanding the importance of that lived experience that their uncles, great-uncles, grandfathers, fathers had.
This story came to you how? I remember you telling me the story of how things came together. So did this exceed your expectations, or what did you get out of this the most, I would say?
No, that's a great question. I was first exposed to this over a year ago by an older gentleman who's passed away, and Giuseppe D'Andrea. He became a mentor of mine. In fact, I met him when I first started learning Italian, and I wanted to talk to native Italian speakers, and I was a member of a community, and he said, oh, you should talk to Joe, and just became friends over the years, just became friends. He would help me with my Italian, but he would tell me stories. And I grew up in Pittsburgh, and this Chambersburg story is 3 hours from here. I never heard of it. As you read their stories, these guys went through a lot, and it wasn't good. And so finally coming to America was almost like, all right, you've had enough. Yeah. I'm going to give you a break. And they were lucky, in a lot of ways, they're very lucky to come to America. So as I'm reading the stories and meeting the family members, like when we went to Milan, you're telling them, they're so passionate, like, you don't understand what it tastes about my father. And then you read the father's diary, their notes, and you're like, my God, I had no idea about all of this. And that was the biggest thing, was they opened up. From the heart, they opened up to all of us. Yeah. They invited us in. They
trusted us
with their stories, with their emotions.
With the emotions, especially.
Exactly. Personal information, personal photos, love letters, you know, everything. They held nothing back. So this is the story. And so as I got to know this, it far exceeded my expectations, because I just thinking it's a chapel. What's the big deal? These were prisoners. Hey, they had it pretty good. Then you start digging in and realizing, yeah, they had it good for that 18 months, but there was a lot going on before that. And oh, by the way, they had to go back. And going back wasn't the greatest experience.
Once the war was over.
Right, because Italy wasn't prospering. It was like one of the family members even says, it was miserable. They were poor, they just got out of a major war, they were bombed, you know, a lot of people were dead. It wasn't a good situation. See, in America, when the war was over, we sort of went back to business as usual. These countries at the end of the war, they didn't go back to business as usual. Yeah. They're digging out the rubble.
They didn't have that return to normalcy.
Exactly. And now these prisoners who'd been away for 4+ years, maybe 5 in some cases, now they go back for the first time and they see what's left. You know, am I going back to my town? Is it going to be there? Or my relative's going to be there? And so that was tremendous. And in fact, one of the diaries was very profound in that regard. And I got to read it from beginning to end, you know, and it starts with his experiences in North Africa. And again, they're not good. They're getting bombed, they're getting attacked, they're trying to surrender, they're marching in the desert, you know, it's just miserable. And they're put on ships, they're being sent here, they're being sent there, and then eventually they finally make it to America, and specifically to Letterkenny. Now they're in Letterkenny. Hey, life's not so bad, I can't believe this. But then they got to go back. And what I loved about his diary was one of the few that said, so what happens when I get back? And we were actually very fortunate enough to interview his son, who actually read the diary. And that was when I read the diary, and you guys recall, I said, before we even filmed one frame, I said, this is how it ends. Yep. Because we got to let people know, at the end of the day, they made it. Yeah. Like a journey for us, we made it. And so they made it.
Allora, 29-10-45, alle ore 7 alzatomi, bevuto un po' di caffè e andato al posto di blocco, che poi con 3 macchine alle 11:30 è giunto a Montagnana. Dopo una mezz'oretta ho incontrato Esterina, che era la fidanzata, poi zio e papà, poi avanti un poco ho incontrato la mamma, zia Maria, Gelmino, tutti i parenti, insomma. Alle 15 è entrato in casa, fine, e qui è finito il diario.
Sono senza la mamma, sono qui prigioniero, questo suolo straniero mi tormenta ogni dì. Salvami, Madonnina beata, alla casetta tanto amata, voglio un giorno ritornare. Se potessi volare, scavalcare il confino, da mammina e babbino vorrei un giorno ritornar. Salvami, Madonnina beata, alla casetta tanto amata, fammi un giorno ritornar.
Okay, we're back. Sean, can you, is everybody unmuted, Sean?
I'm getting the thing set up here. Allow participants to unmute themselves and start their video if they would like. I'll ask you, Glenn, to start your video. Everyone else should be able to do that. I request that if you are muted and you don't want to ask a question or add anything, if you could just stay muted, because the easier thing here is that we don't want to cause too much excess noise here in the background, or else we have to start muting everyone again. So if you are looking to ask a question, go ahead and unmute. Just try to keep it quiet on your end, please. That way we could just make sure there's not any extra noise on the back end.
I have a question.
Well, let me just a second, Barb. Let me just find Steve. Steve, are you unmuted?
I'm here. I'm unmuted.
Yeah, just a second, Barb. But Steve, just thank you for producing such a beautiful film.
Oh, thank you.
There was a lot of activity in the chat, and I know there's a lot of questions. Before we take our first question from Barb Smith, is there anything you would like to add or give us any color on?
I tell you a couple of things real quick. That song you hear right in the end with the gentleman singing, that is a prisoner singing during the war. That was one of the few surviving original audio recordings. So that is a real prisoner. That was provided to me by Antonio Brescianini in Ample. So it was amazing that we got that actual recording of a prisoner singing. It starts out, I think he says something like, "Here I am without my mama, and I can't, if I could fly," or something. Alan, you could probably translate that. But and a couple other things I wanted to just mention, I hope you picked up on. One was, even in Italy, there is still, and I'll use this word, an ignorance of the war. It's just, for some reason, it's not limited to the US. There's just something about history that people just don't appreciate or understand why it is important. And I do a podcast, and I keep telling people when they say, "Well, why should I care about my culture, this or that from 100 years ago?" Because the decisions that were made 100 years ago impacted the next generation, and then their decisions and they made you. So you are the result of decisions that were made for generations. I mean, generations that go back. And so you have to understand your history to understand who you are. And then when you understand who you are, you can understand what you can achieve. Because I think a lot of reasons why people are, quote, depressed or unhappy is because they don't know who they are. They don't know who they are because they don't want to look backwards and really get it. So I wanted to bring that up. And the other thing, I don't know if you guys picked up on this, there were a lot of very insightful comments. One, they all appreciated the fact, because when we filmed this, the Ukraine war was really, really roaring. This was last year. So they got it. This is like the Israeli war is going on, which is still going on. The Ukraine war, which is still going. So they really understood, like, hey, after all of that, we clearly haven't learned our lessons. And unfortunately, even since World War II, how many wars have we had? So I wanted to really pick up on that important piece. And finally, Italy, to me, a lot of people talk about the Korean War as being the forgotten war. I'll tell you, I think Italy is the forgotten campaign of World War II, because when I went back in September to show the film, so we filmed in May in Milan, and we came back, filmed a little more. Then we went back, we premiered it in September in Chambersburg. And then we went back to Milan and Rome to show the film. I actually got a chance to go up to the Abruzzo region where my relatives were from. And I actually went to where the Gustav line was. And they took me they gave me like a little tour, and they took me to this building where all the partisans who had fought the Nazis, you know, they take their picture, like they were either executed, they were caught, or they were just killed in combat, whatever. And not only did they fight the Nazis there, but they actually joined on to the Allied forces and actually fought up through Italy. And there were all these stories they were telling me, and I'm not I'm not like, you know, Dr. Perry, you know, like who's like a formal historian, but I do kind of pride myself on knowing a little more history than the average, you know, person. So even I was like, well, I had no idea how much combat occurred in Italy. I mean, I think Anzio, and you think of Sicily, but there was a lot, you know, of fighting, you know, Monte Cassino, et cetera. So my point though is, a lot of the Italian prisoners, while they had it good, they went back to a country that was not spared the war. So I wanted to just kind of emphasize that point. But to one person put a question real quick. The film has been entered in a lot of festivals. In fact, I'm very happy to say it was accepted in festivals in 6 different countries. We have already won some awards, and
Wow.
are actually pending more festival outcomes. So God willing, you know, we'll get a few more awards, because I do think it was a great team. And again, Paul was literally the first person I reached out to through Google, just finding a name. Paul, if I'm not mistaken. And then Alan, I think I found you just through some sheer random emailing. And then it was Paul, I believe it was either Paul or Alan, who introduced me to Antonio Brescianini, and then off we went. So I just wanted to say that.
The end result is excellent, and you've done
Thanks.
a great service to all of us to record this history. So, you know, your points are well taken. It's why we exist as the Veterans Breakfast Club, to keep these stories alive. So let's get some of our audience involved in questions. Barb Smith was the first to raise her hand or voice. Barb, are you still?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm still here, sir. And thanks to Veterans Breakfast Club. Hi, Paul. I met you this morning on the phone. For the lengthy summaries that you provide before the Zoom conferences are so helpful. And in preparation, I read online an article about the chapel. And lo and behold, I called the website of the chapel, and I spoke and met with Paul Cullinane here this morning. And so my husband and I are planning on visiting him at the chapel soon. And I couldn't help but wonder, watching this marvelous video about 2 Memorial Days ago, I was in Kadira and Carr and spoke with 57 5th and 6th Dutch, 5th and 6th graders of Dutch who lived right near the Margraten Cemetery and right before Memorial Day Cemetery services. And I would love to do this in Italy before the year's end, honest to God. If I could find anybody out there from the film, those wonderful descendants in any of the towns near Florence or Rome where we have friends, I would certainly love to arrange to see if I could arrange to get into one of the classrooms and speak to the kids.
If you want to reach out to me, Barb, Glenn can give you my contact information. I can tell you one thing, and Alan can probably vouch for this. You know, when you work with Antonio, you have friends all over Italy. So if you need anything, reach out to myself or Dr. Alan Perry. We'll gladly.
Thank you.
By the way, Carol, I do want to answer that. That is still going on. An interesting thing is that town will not, the family they are 99% certain who the family is. They just will not answer the phone on Ronnie. We don't know if it's kind of like an embarrassment, a shame, whatever. It's very sad because he just wants to know. But let me tell you something about Italians. In Italy, the firstborn male son is entitled to a lot of the inheritance. It's not like the U.S. If you die in Italy, your firstborn pretty much gets anything unless you had something specifically saying otherwise. So that's why a lot of families that like to go back to find their relatives, sometimes they're not immediately met with, "I'm glad to see you." The first question is, "Why are you here?" Because they want to make sure you're not coming back to take the property. So we don't know if there's a little trepidation or what there, but for whatever reason, we can't figure it out.
Well, listening to this film, it reminds me of how beautiful the language is.
I loved it.
What a great language. Other questions, if you would either raise your hand.
Larry?
Oh.
Speak
Yeah,
up.
I can't raise my hand. You can't see me.
Okay. Well, who is speaking?
Colin.
Colin.
Oh, Colin, please ask your question or comment.
Yeah, my question is that I know that the Italians, although Mussolini was kind of opposed to religion, they did have chaplains in the ranks. In fact, I interviewed some Germans who were baptized by an Italian priest in Libya. Did any of these Italian clergymen become captured, and did they hold services in the chapel, or did they just hold services in general, or did they use American-born chaplains, or did they even have the services?
I'll let Alan handle that because that's a great question.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That is a really wonderful question. I do know that there was an Italian chaplain who did not opt for cooperation, and since he was an officer, he was in Hereford. I know of one. I don't know, though, of Italian chaplains of any service, Navy, Army, that agreed to cooperate. I'm just trying to search my mind right now. And so in general, I have not come across names of priests, that chaplains, army priests that were then sent to various, to camps, and then continued their sacerdotal, their priestly functions. At Letterkenny, this is where the community really begins to tie in, because from the very beginning, the soldiers were both brought into town to Corpus Christi, and they had a priest, Father Johnson, who would come to say Mass on the depot. So there was this reciprocal experience, the community coming into the depot for these Catholic prisoners, and then the Catholic prisoners going into Corpus Christi. And at a certain point, the War Department, as I think you all, if you can remember what Paul was saying, the War Department had buildings that were designed and were built with the help of the POWs, and there was a theater, assembly hall, assembly hall, that if you go to the chapel today, I don't know how many of y'all have been there, but it's right to the left. It's still standing. And they had Mass for several months there when when Mass was held on the depot. But then they continued to go in, different groups would go in to Mass and other sacraments, right? Confession in town. When the War Department understood that there was a need for an actual chapel, there were actually, it's a fascinating story all to really get into the lore of the chapel. But the War Department already had architectural designs in December of 44, blueprints, that is, for the chapel. And the chapel, this wonderful story of the chapel being built. We know who built the chapel. We've actually identified, fascinatingly, a sergeant major who was the head master mason, who worked with a lieutenant who had an amazing artistic training background in Italy, and was able to configure and reconfigure the Army blueprints. And then they went around, and they searched out the remains from these houses that were knocked down, as Paul says, and then put them together. So when it was time to have the chapel consecrated, this too is really interesting. There's not a lot of anything that I've come across in Harrisburg, where the diocese is headquartered. So the the Italian delegate, the apostolic delegate in DC, came up in May and had this wonderful celebration. But that's when the Italians then began. That's where their worship, their faith experience really was centered. Once, but it was only for a few months, of course, because the war ended and then they were repatriated. But they had they recited the rosary in the evenings. Mass, of course, was there on we know for sure on Sundays. And there's just some wonderful stories. When the war ended, the group of Italian soldiers that were reciting the rosary heard the bells that were ringing in Chambersburg, and there were a few even cannons that were being fired at the depot in celebration. So they ran up and rang the bells. And so it's a really interesting, point about the community and, of course, the bonding that took place through faith, and the outreach that took place by the community. There's so much that's centered, and then in memory, the focus on the material construction, the material symbol of their experience. And I'm going on, I apologize, but that's the story about the chaplains as best I can remember, in a long way. Excuse me.
Thank you, Al. Thank you. Darren, I've asked you to unmute. I see that you have your hand up.
Yes. So I just wanted to point out that I got to spend time. I was stationed in Vicenza, and I was also stationed in Germany. And the story that really comes through here, the camaraderie that we built in the army between us as troops, was evidenced in the soldiers, the Italian soldiers. But the love of us for helping, very different from Italy to Germany. The Italians in total were thankful for us. The Germans, the older population, was thankful when I was there, but the younger population was very upset at us. And I think that's also helped to keep this relationship going. The love of the Italians, the interaction, the learning from the experiences. And I think it was very well brought out in the production there. I was quite impressed.
Thank you. Thank you, Darren. I have a question for Steve or Alan or Paul. I don't know if I'll get this number correct, but Americans of German descent in during the war, 1940-41, was like 35%, something like that, of all Americans. Do we know what that number would be for Americans of Italian descent?
We have a number of Italians. So with Italian immigration really beginning in the latter part of the 19th century, latter part of the 1880s, all the way through to first the stop because of the First World War. So 14 through 18, 19, and then to 24 when Congress went to this quota system before actually the numbers, going back to the 19th century before the numbers came. So, most Italian immigrants that came to the state, Glenn, actually went back. They actually went back. So there was 5 million Italians that came to the United States, and about 2.6 went back. So 2.4 million. And by the time of the Second World War, there were around 5 million.
5 million. Okay.
5 million. And I don't know, unfortunately, what, the percentage is, but I do,
Five
that
of 130 million was the
Yeah.
population of the U.S. So much, much smaller than the German ancestry.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just curious because the German ancestry, Flickinger, if you want to be.
I didn't think it was that low. I'm surprised.
has a a certain story about it during World War II as well. Particularly with a lot of Germans who first generation immigrants who ended up being drafted or volunteered for the army and went to Germany and would fighting their cousins.
Awesome.
Bill Flage, I see you have your hand up. You are unmuted.
Yes, sir.
Or Bob, I'm sorry, Bob.
Yes, this film was unbelievable. Mike, I've got I don't know what the correct word is, but the dichotomy I have is what we did with these prisoners was great. However, the Catholic Church on the other side of the world is helping Nazis and the rat line. And I don't know how, the government, I don't know, accommodated both. Well, we know what we were doing with these guys here, but knowing what the Catholic Church was doing on the other side was the problem I have.
That's a good point, and I'll tell you the irony in that was, of course, at the end of World War II, we ended up, for lack of a better term, recruiting a lot of the quote Nazi scientists who, for basically for a lot of the rocket technology and other research they were doing. So I mean, you guys know some of the famous people. So I think at the end of the war, listen, I'll say something I think is a little controversial, but I think I'm right on this. I think at the end of the day, everybody had a little blood on their hands, meaning when it was all said and done, everybody, it was a really bad war. And I think by the end of it, we were obviously the good guys for obvious reasons, but the church, the U.S. government, the Brits, the way that the French kept the German prisoners for years, the Russians kept them into the 50s. I mean, and then some of the, and then in a lot of ways we let a lot of the Japanese off, and then some of them we hanged. There was just, when that war was over, it was a mess.
Oh, you shut this one.
If you're not going to speak, please mute yourself. I allowed everybody to be unmuted so that if you wanted to ask a question, you could. Anybody else with questions? I don't see any other hands raised electronically, or I don't see.
Glenn, in the silence, let me just mention, bringing it a little more up to date, as I reflect on the 4 major visits that I was part of, and 70th anniversary in 2015. Then there were 2 separate visits in 2019, and then a big one in 2022. The message was twofold. One, they really, the Italian descendants that came here really appreciated the fact that we here in this community have taken good care of this chapel. We've cared for it, we've preserved it, and we've had different events there. We had services typically 4 times a year. There were weddings, there were baptisms, there were graduations, funerals, and whatnot. The second thing is the message that continued to come from all of them. I may have mentioned this to Barb Smith, my newfound friend on the phone, is that they really, the fathers and grandfathers, uncles talked a great deal about how well they were cared for, and that has come out very well in the documentary. And so, the Americans really did well in caring for the soldier prisoners that were here. And today I gave a tour to a local community, and in a lot of cases, it's people who have never been to the chapel. And so on our part, just like Ample in Italy, is we're trying to create that awareness in the greater area to get people interested in the chapel and to come here and experience. And Barb indicated today that she's hoping to get here with her husband, Bob, and maybe others. So we're very proud of the fact that we've properly cared for this edifice. And it is a place of remembrance, of tribute, of reflection. And beside the chapel, I would just mention that we built a Veterans Park. And so the impetus for that really was the late Reverend Bill Harder,
the late Senator Terry Punt, the late Congressman Bud Schuster, and of course the Italian consulate, the late Giuseppe Andrea, who Steve mentioned earlier. And there was great love for this chapel and preserving it. And like a lot of things, over time, there's always conversation about, well, let's tear this down and put up a parking lot. Well, thankfully, cooler heads prevailed, and the importance of this story and this history prevailed, and we have it today, and we hope to have it for many, many years to come.
Thank you, Paul. That's very eloquent. I have to say, I've been up and down the Pennsylvania Turnpike 10,000 times in my life. Now I wish I had stopped and taken a little detour. Next time I do that, I will, for sure.
We will welcome you. You just need to call me and I'll be there.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Question?
Barb, you wanted to say something?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So looking at this beautiful chapel reminded me of our trip a couple years ago, 2.5 hours due east in Philly to visit the Chapel of the Four Chaplains. So if you're in the area to see the Chambersburg Chapel and the Four Chaplains Chapel in Philly, it'll be amazing for you in the Navy Yard. And also, I was just curious, side story from Veterans Breakfast Club, if anybody in the audience is going to be participating on March 29th at the Veterans Breakfast Club Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans ceremony at the Heinz Center. I wonder if anybody in the audience is going to be attending. Bob and I are going to be able to go.
Yeah. I would guess many are. I think we have, Sean had to drop off, but I think we have over 300 people signed up.
That's marvelous. Great. Can't wait.
I tell you, my two Vietnam veteran brothers, older brothers, John, who lives here locally, and Bill, they're my half brothers. John and Bill Barber will be there. And if I could do a little, we didn't do any station break tonight, but if I could do a little promo next Monday on Veterans Breakfast Club, we are going to have a program on force recon for the U.S. Marines in Vietnam. And it features my brother Bill, who was a force recon in 65 and 66, and a man named Doc or Bruce Norton, who was obviously a Navy corpsman and force recon in sort of 69 and 70, but went on to become a Marine historian and has written many books on Vietnam and on force recon. So, and I'm going to step out of my World War II trench and MC that program Monday night on Vietnam. So it ought to be really interesting. Not too many people understand force recon or have too much knowledge of it. So please tune in Monday night.
I was mentioning to Barb today when we talked briefly that on the 29th of March, which was the congressional date for Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans, we're building a second year Vietnam Welcome Home breakfast at the American Legion. And I'm going to help MC that. And we're hoping to have close to 300 veterans and family members at that breakfast. And last year it was well received, and it's just something important that we
and I'll go down.
Feels is so important to let our veterans know that they're cared for.
I did the other day.
We continue to do things for them.
Yeah. Again, spoken very well, Paul. Thank you so very much. And that's the objective. Todd has put together these wonderful programs for years now on Vietnam Veterans Day, and they're always very well attended and very moving. So we're looking forward to that. Monday night, or sorry, next Saturday is 29th at Heinz History Center. If you haven't registered, just go in and register. It is getting to be well past the witching hour, 8:58. Is there anyone else that would like to ask? Carol Popchik, please.
Yes, I have to tell you that many times I'm not a veteran. I'm the daughter-in-law, niece of many World War II veterans. And sometimes I leave the program so depressed, you know, by scenes that I've pictured or stories that have been told. This was one of the most uplifting stories of World War II I've heard in a long time. And so much love comes out of these stories that it's very encouraging. But I got to tell you, I don't think I will ever say the phrase, "How do you want your eggs?" without getting a chill up and down my spine. That is an amazing memory from this film. Thanks for sharing it, Steve.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was, these people were just, if you could have met them, it was like they just wanted to tell their story. And it was just so awesome to be a part of it.
You know,
So say that we are so proud that Steve and his crew came to our community to tell this story. We could not be more proud, and we think it has been the capstone of all of our efforts since we really started this in 2011.
I think the Italians would say, bravo, bravissimo.
Grazie mille, Carol. Grazie, Paul. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. That does mean a lot. And we're going to be there with a film crew on September 11th to film the 80th anniversary when the families come back. So really, I can't stress this enough. These places don't survive without support. We need you to go visit this place, and then when you go, you're going to like it. Come back for the 80th. Let's really, you know, welcome these folks. You know,
I've already promised Steve I'm going to be there.
there you go. There's one.
Yeah.
Barb, you're going to be there. It sounds like too.
Well, listen, let me thank everybody for tonight's program, especially Steve Mancini. You've done a wonderful service to this community to produce this wonderful film. And like Carol said, and Carol, thank you for putting us in touch with Steve. It's great to find a heartwarming story about World War II rather than all the death and destruction we normally visit every Thursday night. Alan Perry, thank you so very much for your support here.
Sure, you're welcome.
Being a veteran, and Paul, you as well. And we hope that you come back to the Veterans Breakfast Club. We'll be in touch, and we'll send you an email every day until you surrender.
The white flag is already coming out.
Okay. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and good night. Take care.
Good night.
Take care, everyone.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you. Take care, Steve, Paul.
Take care, Paul.
Take care, Alan. Steve.
Alan, Paul, good seeing you again.